lot of books to talk about today. Hi friends, it's Shuba and welcome back to my channel. We are going to talk about all of the books that I read in March. I read 11 books. I did end up DNFing a few books, and I read one book on my anticipated releases, or my 25 in 2025. So let's get right into it. We're gonna start off and talk about the books that I ended up not finishing, books that I decided to DNF, books that didn't serve me anymore and it wasn't worth me continuing. The first one being The Land of Milk and Honey by C. Pam Zhang. I was supposed to read this for Rainy Day Book Club's book club, and I got 50% of the way through. It's a really short book. It is 230-ish pages, and I made it to page 100 and something, and I was so bored. At first, I thought the writing style was really elegant and beautiful. It was very long and very descriptive, especially for the setting of this story that we have. But then by the halfway point, I got bored. I was tired of it. I wanted something to happen and nothing was really happening. And at that point I took a step back and decided that this just isn't for me. I love the concept and the premise of it. This is about our main character. I don't know this person's name, but they are a chef, and this is kind of like a dystopian society setting of a story. There's this smog or fog that takes over the world and nothing can grow. People can't live healthily and happily. And this main character, she's a chef and she gets invited to live in this secluded, gated community and be a chef for them. And in that gated community, there's a lot of wealth and prosperity with food that can be grown. It's very different than what her life was outside of the community. As we're reading the story, she has a lot of guilt and a lot of mismatched feelings because she does come from the outside and she's an outsider looking in, getting to see how this community doesn't care about throwing food away. They don't care about how they're treating other people in the environment outside. It's very snootish and uppity, and the premise sounded very interesting. I think that if this plot was in a different book, if it was longer, if it was less wordy, then I would probably enjoy it more. I wouldn't say I would recommend it because I never finished it, so I can't recommend it, but that's just unfortunate because I was going in with this hoping that I would like it, as we do with all books really, and I didn't vibe with it, but that's okay. I'm sure someone else will. The next book that I decided to DNF recently actually is a book that I've been reading for quite a bit. It is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This is an 800+ page story, very chunky, and the writing is tiny as well. I've been reading this whenever I've been feeling like it, not forcing myself to read this book since this is such a heavy book with a lot of trigger warnings and just emotional topics in general. This is a story about 4 students and their lives in college and outside of college living in New York. They are all best friends and it centers around love, friendship, and other trigger warnings. I didn't get far enough to dive into what's really happening to one of our main characters. I ended up at around page 200 and I decided to DNF this book based on some controversy that I found online that's been on Bookstagram and Book Talk about this book, and some of the beliefs that the author has that she writes in this story I personally do not agree with, which is why I decided that I am not going to give the time and effort to read. And I'm trying to be as vague as possible because I don't want to get banned on YouTube. I don't want any flags since this is a video that I plan on publishing. Long story short, DNF'd it at 200 pages. Will not be continuing it. I'll probably get rid of this book based on what I've learned. If you want to talk about this, I would love to. DM me on Instagram and let's have a chat. A book that was on my March TBR but I didn't get to reading was Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan. Listen, I'm really excited to read this book. I truly am. The premise is very interesting to me. It's about a girl who kind of gets sucked into her favorite fantasy series, but she's the villain in this story. And that sounds really good. I love a story within a story. I just don't think that this is the time for me to read it. I want to read it. I feel like it might be more of a summer read for me. I just didn't gravitate to pick this book up this month. That being said, doesn't mean that I'm not going to read it. I will. Those are the books that I DNF'd or didn't get a chance to read. Now let's talk about the books that I did get a chance to read. I had a really good month. April had a lot of highs. Honestly, looking at my stack, not very many lows at all. I didn't give any book lower than a 3-star, which is really good. I still usually recommend 3 stars or maybes for me. I'm not talking about the books that I DNF'd, okay? These are just the books that I read from front to back, read all of them. Now let's get into it. Speaking of my 25 books in 2025, I only read one book that was on my anticipated releases for this month, and it is the 3rd book in the Legend-Born cycle. I did end up reading all 3 of these books, the 3rd book being Oathbound by Tracy Deonn. I guess all 3 books are by Tracy Deonn. I did listen to the audiobook for both of these books. I love the audiobooks. They're very, very good. And then I recently finished this book. I did both audiobook and reading it with my eyes. So I did some immersive reading and it was the best experience. If there's one series that you should read, it is Legend-Born Cycle by Tracy Deonn. I think that each book gets better. This 3rd one is my favorite thus far. If you grew up watching Shadowhunters, you would probably really love this book. This is a dark academia series that revolves around the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. There are a lot of reasons as to why I love this series. I've read the first 2 books 2 times, and each time I am impressed even more by Tracy Deonn and her writing style. To start off with, I love the characters. Bree is such a strong, independent woman, but the thing is she's only a teenager. She's a young adult, but she's badass. She's such a cool character, and her magical abilities that she gains throughout the books is also such a compliment to who she is and what she believes in, and I love the combination of the two, and I think that that makes her such a strong main character. Not to mention, I love the supporting characters that we have in this book. I feel like I go back and forth between 2 of the characters, but William is still one of my favorites through and through from the very beginning. Didn't really tell you what the story is about. Really quickly, this is about Bree. She gets accepted into this early education program at a college, UNC Chapel Hill, I think. Her mom just passed away, and so she's grieving with that and her mom's loss. The first night that she's at this college, she sees demons sucking energy out of students, and from there she starts to learn about this secret society called the Legend-Born Society and how that's connected to the Knights of the Round Table and how that's connected to magic all in all, and it is so good. It's written so good. Tracy Deonn, I need the next book. Also, what Tracy Deonn does a brilliant job on is the social commentary on America's history regarding slavery and racism and how that ties into the magic system and the secret society. It's written in such an eloquent way that it just all makes sense. Everything connects to each other, and reading from Bree's point of view is such a good time. I love this series, and you need to read this so we can love it together. This next book that I read pretty early on in March, and it is Husbands by Holly Gramazio, and I surprisingly really enjoyed this contemporary fiction, literary fiction, magical realism fiction story. This is a story about our main character. Her name is Lauren. She comes home one night from her best friend's bachelorette party, and she finds a husband in her house. Turns out, though, She didn't know she had a husband. She's supposed to be single. He just kind of popped out of the attic and there he is. She realizes that every time her husband goes into the attic, she gets another husband. Different characteristics, different personality traits. He looks different, he acts different, and thus begins the journey of Lauren trying to be happy with what she has, and she kind of learns to be happy with the mundane, with the simple things in life, and nothing is going to be perfect, because when she gets a new husband, her story changes completely. Her life changes entirely. So it's really interesting to see how you might think that there's endless possibilities and chances in life, but they're not always going to be great, and sometimes what you have is good enough. And I really enjoyed this story. I thought that it was funny. First of all, I was laughing out loud reading this book. I had a great time, but also I loved the themes within the story of what I just mentioned. And it was just a book that I would have never thought to pick up if it wasn't for our book of the month. I will say the middle was a little bit slow because we do have that repetitiveness of Lauren constantly getting a new husband. But other than that, honestly, I had a really good time reading this book, and I recommend. The Dissonance by Sean Hamill. I was gifted this book way back in July of 2024, and I'm glad that I finally got around to it. This is a 90s style story that reminded me a lot of It and then Stranger Things. So if you're a fan of either of those or both, then you might want to check this book out. I really liked this story of bringing back friendship from your past and working together as a family to kind of solve this mystery. This is a story about our three main characters who haven't seen each other since high school. One night in high school, something devastating and tragic happens, and since then they kind of fell apart, and 20 years later they're having to revisit that experience and go back to their hometown and solve a mystery. We do get multiple point of views between the three of them, but we also get another point of view. His name is Owen, and he's a lot younger. He's in high school now, present day, while we're reading, because we do go back and forth, I believe, at some point, from what I'm remembering. He has a connection between these three adults, but he doesn't know how, and they don't know how either. It was a good book. I think that the premise was very interesting, and I sped through the book for sure. However, my only qualm with this story is that the magic was not explained enough. A lot of the times when I'm reading a story, especially if it's fantasy, I play it in my mind, and I couldn't picture the magic in my mind. I couldn't picture the characters doing whatever actions that they need to make the magic happen. And that was my only issue with the story. It is kind of thick. I mean, it's over 400 pages. It's almost 500 actually, and the writing is small. So there's a lot of substance in the book. I just wish that there was more with the magic that was taught to us, because then I would have appreciated it more, since I do love magical stories. All in all though, I am glad that I picked this book up finally. I've never read anything by Sean Hamill, but I do have A Cosmology of Monsters by him. So I'll have to give that a go, since I now know his writing style and what to expect from his stories. It's just a story that comes back full circle, and I appreciated that aspect of it, and I think that it was written well overall, minus the magic part. If you haven't watched my vlog for this, you should watch it, but I read B.K. Borison's First Time Caller. This is my first B.K. Borison story, and I had really high expectations going into this because, first of all, the cover is so cute, and second of all, everyone had been raving about it, so I thought, I'm like everyone, I'm gonna like it too. However, it wasn't my favorite romance, and that's okay. Just because I don't like a book doesn't mean that you're not gonna like a book, and maybe you should still give it a chance. This is a story like Sleepless in Seattle, and this is supposed to take inspiration from it. I love the premise of the story and how it starts off, because our main character, one of our main characters, her name is Lucy, her daughter calls in to this radio show that Aiden works at, where Aiden gives love advice, and she basically says, my mom needs to find love, can you help her with advice? And Lucy finds out one night, and then she starts talking to Aiden, and because of that, the radio show's listening numbers go up, and from there they work together on this radio talk show to basically help Lucy find love. So love the premise of it, and it was pretty good halfway through, and then about 2/3 of the way through, I really did not like Aiden, especially with a third act breakup that we do have. So if you don't like third act breakups, just know that it's coming for you. I think that the first half was really great, and then the ending was really great too. I loved how it ended, but that part where we have that conflict, it should have been removed completely and there would have been no issues. I would have really enjoyed the book otherwise. I loved Lucy as our main female character. She is communicative, she knows what she wants even though she's struggling with love. She is just a strong character and I liked that from her. Aiden was a little not Lucy's type, I personally thought, but they ended up working out fine, I suppose. Not my favorite couple in books that I've read before. It was okay, and if I had to say would I recommend this book, I would say maybe if you have read her other stories before. I've heard that her writing has improved with this book compared to Love Light Farms, so take that as you will, or wish. What's that phrase? The next book is Set Piece by Lana Schwartz. I was gifted this copy by 831 Stories, and I really enjoyed this book. It's short, it's sweet, there's barely any conflict, and it all just made sense. It just seemed very realistic. This is a second chance romance, which you know that I love. I say that in every video. I think you all know by now, although newcomers here. Now you know, I love a second chance romance. Second chance romance about a product designer and an actor shooting on the same film together. So they meet, they have a one-night stand, and then I forget how many years later, they're working on the same project and they're gonna give it a go. And I love the realistic aspect of it. For how short this book was, I didn't feel rushed with the story at all. I also didn't feel like it dragged. I thought the pacing was perfect. I read this book in one sitting. So really, this might be the first novella that I've read before, and I normally don't gravitate towards novellas because I never thought that I would want to read romance this short. But it turned out that I enjoyed this book. I also love our characters because both of them were very communicative from the start. I like that our main male character, his name is Jack, close enough. His name is Jack, and he is sure of himself, and he is an actor, but he wants that normal life, and he wants to make things work with our other character. Her name is CJ, who's the product designer. And CJ does have a daughter, so having her find that balance between wanting to make sure that she's thinking of her daughter first, but then also giving her heart a chance to find that spark again with Jack was just really sweet. And it ended up with a perfect ending, and I really enjoyed it. I don't want to talk too much about this book since it is so short. I could basically give the story away at this point. So let's move on. I do recommend this book though. I also read this next book in a vlog, and it is The Ex-Girlfriend Murder Club by Gloria Chao. I was gifted this book by HarperCollins on NetGalley, and I'm so glad that I took a chance because this book was so much fun. Oh my goodness. It's really funny. I thought it was very clever. I loved all three of our main characters and just the murder mystery of it all while it's still being a comedy. If you like John Tucker Must Die, then you should read this book. If you like The Flight Attendant with Kaylee Cuoco on Max, you should read this book. If you like Dial A for Aunties, I've heard that that's very similar based on what I've reviewed on, then you should read this book. If you like Finley Donovan series, you should read this book. And I should too, because I haven't read the latter two, and I found that I absolutely love comedic murder mystery stories. I like them more than cozy mysteries or cozy fantasies, I think, just because there's humor in it. It's light, it's fluffy, but also your brain is still working where you want to try to figure out who done it and what happened. So this was genuinely a great time and I loved it so much. I read it very quickly. This is basically the premise of John Turger Must Die, our main character. She finds out that her boyfriend is cheating on her with 2 other girls. And then they band together to pull a prank on the boyfriend. His name is Tucker Jones. Funny. And when they go to his apartment to pull a prank, and the prank is really silly and very funny and gross, they find him dead in a closet. And from there, they're trying to solve this mystery before anyone can say that they did it and they killed their ex. I also really liked all 3 of our girly pops. So we only read from Catherine's point of view, one of the characters, one of the girlfriends, and I really liked her. Our main character, she is Asian, so she juggles a lot between trying to make her parents happy, but also trying to do what she wants to do. And I'm not saying that that's not with other cultures, but as a South Asian myself, I can kind of relate to that. And reading from her mind as she's juggling with all of this while she's trying to solve a murder is just really funny, and also I could empathize with what she's going through. All around a good time, and I'm smiling a lot because I really liked this book. Anyway, I recommend The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This was my Fable Book Club's pick for March. It is a historical fiction horror story set in the 1950s Jim Crow, Florida. Check your trigger warnings and content warnings before you go into this book. It is not a light book at all. It was actually very tough to read, but I also could not put the book down. And from reading it with other people in my book club, it sounds like they all felt very similarly to how I felt reading the story. I do have a vlog for a lot of these books that I read this month. It's such a good book. I 100% recommend this story. I did some immersive reading with it. I was gifted the copy by Saga Press, so I did read it online through NetGalley as an e-arc, but then also I did find the audiobook for it, so I did do both and I really liked it. Fun fact, the narrator for The Reformatory is the same narrator as the Legendborn cycle, so I feel like she was in my mind most of March since I read Legendborn and Bloodmarked. And then The Reformatory. So the story is centered around our main character. His name is Robert. He's 12 years old. During this time period, life is still segregated for blacks and whites. He ends up kicking a white son of a wealthy white family, and because of that, he is sent to the Reformatory, which is a school for troubled children. No one should be going there. He's sent there for 6 months, and basically from there, we see how life is like for him as he's trying to just get by day and to survive. We get his point of view, and then we also get Gloria's point of view. Gloria is Robert's sister, and she's trying to get him out of the Reformatory. The horror of this book is that Robert can see haints, and haints are ghosts. So while he's at the Reformatory, he's learning a lot about the history of the Reformatory and what happened to other children who were there before him. I'm not spoiling anything because this is basically history and what happened in real life, but I also think this is a very important and good book that you should read, to where I don't want to talk about the plot anymore. This story is heavily centered around life during that time before Civil War really started, as we were gearing up to it, and just how humans were treating other humans. And it's so awful, and I know that we're dealing with it today. It's like we never learned. I can't say that you have to be in the mindset to read this book, because I don't think that someone can truly ever be in the mindset to read about the horrors that happened during the 1950s, but it's so important that we remember the history and what happened, and then so we can take what we learned, share it with other people, and try to be better human beings. That's all I have to say about this book. Read it, just read it. The last book that I want to talk about, which was one of the first books that I read in March, and I feel like I don't even remember reading it at this point because it was so long ago. It is Nocticadia by Carrie Lake, and wow, I surprisingly really enjoyed this book. This is a gothic academia fantasy story that revolves around parasites. It's really descriptive and very gross, but also I am not weird about that kind of stuff. I am okay with gore, so I felt okay reading this book. This is about our main character. I forget her name, but she is trying to figure out what happened to her mom, and her mom ended up randomly dying, and it revolves around a parasite, and she gets accepted into this prestigious school where she goes called Dracadia, and there she works with a professor, and things happen with this professor. The cliffhangers were wild. The connections between each characters were written really well and intricate to where I never saw any of that coming. The ending was strange. I didn't like that last chapter. If you read it, you know, or like the epilogue. I did not like that at all. I just wish I never read it. I didn't want anything to do with that. Other than that, I thought the book was really good. I can't say I'm a big fan of teacher-student age gap romance, and that's what we have in this story with this gothic, dark romance academia. I'm just saying buzzwords out at ya, hoping you'll figure it out. It was still overall a really good book. It's gory. There is a little bit of horror to it. I think that the plot was really good. Did I read this book? Definitely read it. I want to read Anathema by Carrie Lake since I read Nocticadia. Nocticadia is almost 700 pages. So if I read Nocticadia, then I can read Anathema. They're heavy books. They're chunky. Kind of intimidating. I was intimidated by Nocticadia, and I got through it, so maybe you can too. Would I recommend? Maybe. I think you have to be the right type of person, like who enjoys gothic academia with parasites and gore to like it, so maybe. Leaning towards yes. That is my spiel for all of the books that I read in March. It was a good month. I had some great reads and a lot of recommendations too. Let me know if you end up reading anything that I recommend, and let me know if you like it or not. I will see you in another video. April is gonna be great, and I'm very excited for the content that I am brainstorming and coming up with. I will see you next week. Bye.